Here we are. It is draft week. The San Francisco 49ers might have dropped some hints, might be dropping breadcrumb trails to the wrong location for other teams. Smoke screens. What are the 49ers up to? Who are they visiting with? What is the plan for the San Francisco 49ers 2025 NFL draft on today's Locked On 49ers?
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Love our everydayers out there. Thanks for hanging with us all season long, all draft season long, getting really close to the real thing. And then keep hanging with us. We break down all the prospects, the 49ers draft, get you ready for training camp and the 2025 season. If you're new to the program, welcome. Subscribe on YouTube or anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And today's episode brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay tuned for the Armada Player of the Week later in the show. All right, Croc, I think we've got to just dive into the 30 visits, the draft plans. Matt Barrows has dropped his article kind of officially confirming a lot of the reports that we saw. And shout out to Steph Sanchez at Steph49K, who does a good job every year of tracking all the 49ers visits and player interest. And so you can go to her Twitter account and find the spreadsheet, and I'm going to bring it up and show you some 30 visits. You can find all the other stuff, players they've met with at the Combine and the Senior Bowl and all kinds of things like that. And so I think we can learn a lot of clues about the San Francisco 49ers from this, Croc. And I think the biggest key in all of this is not necessarily the specific team-to-player connection. And the 49ers usually have a pretty strong connection and usually draft a lot of guys that they bring in for their 30 visits and that they meet with pre-draft, but sometimes they don't. And I think the most famous one, Croc, was Mike McGlinchey, who they didn't meet with at all. Ricky Pearsall, they didn't meet with at all, but they met with a lot of other players they ended up drafting. But those specific players, they didn't, and those were a little bit surprising to folks. But I think the biggest thing you can learn from it, beyond specific players, is the positions, right? Remember in, what was it, 3 drafts ago now, that the 49ers met with a whole bunch of tight ends. And what did they do? They drafted 2 tight ends. Turns out neither one of them were very good, and one of them's off the roster, and the other one might be barely hanging on to a roster spot this year. Braden Willis was 7th round guy, so it's not like it's a win for him to still make the team and be on the roster a couple of years later. But the 49ers were looking at tight ends. They drafted 2 of them, and the 49ers have really been strong with that correlation. So it doesn't mean they're going to draft specifically all the players they brought in for 30 visits, Croc. In fact, they might have confirmed that they don't like a guy that they brought in. Be like, this guy's got character concerns. Let's talk to him. And they're like, yeah, you know what? We don't like him. We're not going to draft him. So it might be confirming the opposite. They might be bringing guys in purposely to make teams think that they're interested in the one specific guy. But I think the thing we can really start to take away from this, Croc, is who they're looking at, what the rounds are that these players are mostly going to go in. And I think that kind of clues us into the draft plan. So I want to talk about that on today's show. And then I want to talk about some of the scouting reports of players who have been brought in that we haven't really talked about yet on this podcast so far this draft season, Croc. And we talked about a couple of those DBs recently that you broke down. Do you have a strong vibe before I bring this up on the screen where the 49ers are going to go in this draft right now, Croc, especially at the top?
Yeah, what it reminds me of, especially with them bringing it, right, they brought in a lot of defensive tackles. And I remember on social media, I posted one of our plays. It's called Y Cross. It's kind of one of those air raid staples, right? One of my kids said, Coach Croc, like, don't post our play. Like, everybody's going to know our play. I'm like, dude, Y Cross is in a lot of air raid offenses. A lot of people have like that concept. When I look at the 49ers and a lot of people that they brought in, you can know their game plan. It's all about execution. It's all about you and how well you execute. So bringing a lot of defensive tackle, bringing a lot of 3-techs. Who cares if people know that you want a 3-tech? Bring them all in and find the guy that's right for you and make sure you just execute the pick. So I like the thought that they brought a lot of guys in. I don't think it's a smokescreen. I think they're trying to figure out who's going to be the best guy for us. And it's on them to just make sure that they pick the right guy.
We talked about this a little bit last week, Croc, and Viet Ta in the chat says, rumor season, lying season in full swing. And it's all these mock drafts have corner going to the San Francisco 49ers. And if you look at the 49ers roster and you look at all the 30 visits and players they brought in, that tells you that they are looking so hard at defensive line. Croc, you and I keep talking about this. We're like, yeah, maybe. I mean, if there's an all-pro gold jacket corner and you don't like the other guys at the position you need most, to take them, sure, right? Like, it's the draft. You have to take the best player if it's in a completely different tier of prospect. But all these mock drafts from insiders have the Niners taking cornerback. And I'm like, I don't know, man. It doesn't make sense. And then you look at the 30 visits, Croc. And so maybe behind the scenes, they are telling people, and that's the smoke screen, is they're doing the Mac Jones thing. Because remember, like, by the way, don't go 100% by what the insiders are saying either. Because 100% of insiders said the Niners were taking Mac Jones in 2021 when it was indeed Trey Lance was the pick. I'm going to bring the prospect visits here up on the screen so we can kind of take a look at the folks that the 49ers are bringing in and taking a look at. Zoom in a little bit. We'll talk all about it here if you're on the audio side of things and you can't see it on the YouTube edition of this podcast. So when it comes to cornerback, who are the cornerbacks that the 49ers have brought in for 30 visits? Well, it pales in the comparison of how many defensive linemen they brought in. And these are the names of corners the 49ers have brought in for 30 visits. Kobe Bryant, Bilal Kone, Upton Stout, who's a new name just added to the list, and Quincy Riley. And we've watched 3 of those 4. And I've actually watched all of the players on this list. Now I've watched a little bit of Upton Stout, who's kind of an undersized safety / nickel guy. He's being projected in the 5th-ish round. But here's the thing. They're all kind of day 3 guys. Maybe Quincy Riley sneaks into the end of round 2, but if he did, it'd probably be pick 100 that the 49ers drafted him at the very end of round 3. I think he's maybe even more of a 4th-round guy. Bilal Kone, 4th, 5th round, sort of a grade. Kobe Bryant, I think we liked him less than all those guys, Croc, and we'd be looking at him since the Niners don't have a 6th-round pick, maybe one of the 7th-round picks on him. And he might go earlier. He might go in the 5th round. But that's the type of player the 49ers are doing more work on at cornerback. So they're either throwing a smoke screen, or what makes the most sense is something that we would have expected all along, Croc, that they're going to do some damage with defensive linemen early in this draft and then reevaluate late day 2 into day 3 and start looking at cornerbacks. So that to me just screams like an obvious thing for me, that the corners is going to be a day 3 pick for the Niners in this draft. And it should be. They need corners, but insiders putting corners early, I'm just not buying it in this draft, Croc.
Yeah, I'm not buying it early. And again, maybe it could be a smoke screen. Maybe the insiders are right and the 49ers are trying to get people off of their tail. Oh, no. We want interior defensive line. Look at how many D-line we brought in. Look how many edge rushers we brought in. That's what we want to do, and that's the direction we want to go in very high. We're looking at these day 3 cornerbacks. Of course, we're not looking at a high guy. And since you don't see a highly ranked cornerback on this list, maybe that's exactly what they want to do, is actually go high. Like, that could be the lying season part of it. That could be the smoke screen. And by all reports, a lot of people were saying Mac Jones at 3. It sounds like Kyle did. I think when they made the trade, I do think it was Mac Jones in his head. And along the way, he got swayed off of that. And if you remember, maybe a couple of days before the pick, all of a sudden it was Schefter and a couple other guys saying, I think it might be Trey Lance. But when they traded up to 3, it was with Mac Jones in mind. So I think this is a very fluid situation. How much of lying is going on right now, we'll see. But I don't think it's not nothing that a lot of people are mocking cornerback to the 49ers.
So it's either, to me, that all the insiders know what the 49ers are up to, and they're going to take a cornerback early, and they're smoke screening the heck out of everybody with these visits. Or what I really think is they're not trying to be cute. They're just trying to do their work on the rounds that they're going to be taking these cornerbacks in. And that's what I think with this one. And that's why I kind of go with the non-specific thing. It doesn't mean they're going to draft these specific corners. I just think they're doing work at a certain point of the draft for a reason. And they're not wasting, because it's one thing to smoke screen, but how much time and resources you're going to waste smoke screening versus actually doing the work on the guys you're going to draft too. Like, you could do a smoke screen here and there. That's why I think it's more position specific than player specific for me. Like, they might not be drafting any of these defensive linemen early, but they're doing their work on this part of the draft, and maybe they want people to think that these are the players that they're going to take at these spots, and they're actually going to take a different player at these spots, but the same position groups.
Yeah, I did a mock draft, and a lot of times I like to do one little mock draft that I post out to social media. So that mock is completed. But I would say, we watched a lot of these prospects because they were on the visits with the 49ers. And at certain points when they were available later in drafts, like, well, I'm very familiar with this guy. I know what he does. I know who he is, at least us on film. But the 49ers saying, well, we brought him in. You don't need all of those guys out of those cornerbacks. I won't say which one, but we got 4 cornerbacks that's up there that we've watched. I watched all 4, and there was one of those guys that I selected. So that could be it as well. Hey, we're going to rank these guys. We're willing to take this guy here, take this guy here, take this guy here. But if one of us falls to it in a slot where it matches his, where we have him going, his value, man, I don't think that they'll look the other way when it comes to drafting that player.
I want to get deeper into the 30 visits here, exactly who these prospects are, what the 49ers might be looking at doing, and what I think the plan is for the San Francisco 49ers in the 2025 draft. Next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles. EA Sports College Football 25. You can play with some of these prospects the Niners are about to draft. Call of Duty Black Ops, Avowed. As easily as you stream your favorite shows, it's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. Speaking of those streaming shows, how about 4K streaming, endless entertainment? Watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and so much more. All you got to do is head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, and Fire TV Cube. Those are a mouthful. All these different devices. Tons of great stuff. 4K Stick, Amazon Fire TV. Amazon.com is where you got to go. Fire TV/Locked On. Again, that is Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On. You can watch the draft in 4K. Watch the 49ers' newest prospects. Here's what the 30 visits look like, and here is the rundown of what the 49ers have been doing with the players they have brought in. Starts with a whole bunch of defensive linemen. Edge rushers, James Pierce, Elijah Roberts out of SMU. Most people know James Pierce out of Tennessee, speed rusher. Shamar Stewart, Texas A&M. David Walker, Central Arkansas. Michael Williams, Georgia, defensive end. And those are the confirmed reports. There's been some other reported visits. Mike Green from Marshall and Landon Jackson out of Arkansas that were not confirmed by Matt Barrows, the latest. So maybe, and look, with these 30 visits, sometimes scheduling doesn't work out and these prospects are flying all over the country. And sometimes the visits just don't match up and you can't really get the player in, even though there was interest to come have the player come in. So that's why maybe there'd be a reported visit from the agent to a reporter and that player doesn't end up coming in. Interior defensive lineman, Darius Alexander from Toledo, Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee, Northern California guy, Aeneas Peebles, defensive tackle out of Virginia Tech, and then a couple unconfirmed in TJ Sanders from South Carolina and Tyleek Williams from Ohio State. We talked about the corners already. Just a couple of linebackers on the 30 visits. And there's 27 of the 30 visits have been confirmed by Matt Barrows that are on this list. Kane Medrano, speedy linebacker out of UCLA. I'm going to put a pin on him. Chris Pupal out of Ole Miss, another linebacker, both, early day 3 types, I think. And we've already talked a lot about Pupal on this. I want to talk about Cade Medrano and then another angle from the 30 visit with bringing in a UCLA linebacker. Offensive linemen that have been brought in. Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas. Josh Connerly out of Oregon. Josh Simmons. Then you have out of Ohio State, injury red flag there on Josh Simmons, so not surprising they would want to bring in someone like that to get their hands on him and look at him and see how he's doing post-injury. You got Anthony Belton, big offensive tackle out of NC State. Ariante Ursary, another big offensive lineman out of Minnesota. Marcus Bow, who was an offensive tackle, might move inside. An athletic offensive lineman from Purdue. You got Jonah Monheim from USC and Caleb Rogers, a guard out of Texas Tech University. A couple of wide receivers. Kyle Williams, one of Croc's favorites. In fact, Croc's draft crush, I believe, is Kyle Williams out of Washington State. Jordan Watkins, late round, a wide receiver out of Ole Miss, has some height, weight, and height and speed, especially 4.37 40 time. And then 3 tight ends, Jalen Conyers from Texas Tech, late rounder. Harold Fannin Jr. led college football with 1,500 receiving yards at tight end out of Bowling Green. And then Jackson Hawes, Georgia Tech tight end. And then an unconfirmed LSU offensive lineman, Miles Frazier, brought in. So that is the list of confirmed and unconfirmed player visits for the San Francisco 49ers. And when you start looking at the position groups that they've done heavily, obviously there was only 3 or 4 position groups there, right? Defensive line, both edge and interior, couple linebackers, couple corners, whole bunch of offensive linemen, couple wide receivers, couple tight ends, right? And so when you just look at the volume of the position groups, Croc, and then you look at where the prospects are graded and likely to end up being drafted of the position groups that they did bring in and spend a lot of time with, to me, it tells me that they think that edge might dry up early. And if I had to base I will base my final mock draft a lot on this, it seems like the plan to me is, Croc, that of course they want a defensive lineman. They might go tackle first, but I think they might go edge first because tackle is so deep, and they brought more defensive tackles from different rounds than they did edge rushers from different rounds. Now they have kind of like a gap, and why I say it this way is because they brought a bunch of first round edge rushers and then looked at more like 5th, 4th, 5th, 6th round edge rushers. So not many 2nd, 3rd, 4th rounders, but they brought in a bunch of defensive tackles and offensive linemen that they could potentially target in round 2 and 3, especially. And so that tells me that if I had to guess, just based on my work I've done as the scouting reports and looking at these prospects, Croc, looking at the 30 visits, looking at the other visits and players they paid a lot of attention to in this draft process, the smartest way to play this thing potentially because of where you can get the most talent in different rounds of the draft, the plan might be for the 49ers to attack edge in the first round, get a defensive end there because that position dries up a little quicker, then target whoever's best available between defensive tackle and offensive line at the top of round 2. And then whichever position they don't get there, go the other way in round 3, and then go defensive tackle there and potentially double up on defensive tackle and then offensive line in round 3 if they do go defensive line in rounds 1 and 2. And then on day 3, they're just going to be picking from best available. They'll find a linebacker. They'll find a corner in round 4. In round 5, they might go get a tight end. In round 7, they might get a wide receiver, right? And so, and then maybe double up on some of these positions. You get a tackle early, you get an interior offensive lineman late. You get one big defensive tackle, you get more of a rotational defensive tackle in the later round. So I think that's the plan. And even if it's not these specific names, Croc, I think the position groups and where these guys are slotted tells us a lot about the 49ers draft plans. If I had to bet today, and my final mock draft is going to look like that, it's going to be edge, defensive tackle, offensive line, maybe another defensive tackle, and then we're looking best available corner, linebacker, tight end, wide receiver throughout the rest of the draft. Probably throw a running back and maybe even a flyer on a backup quarterback at some point in there. What do you think, Croc?
I'm trying not to give too much away with my one and only mock that I have, but I think we're on the same page with that because that's how the board falls. And when you watch these guys, it's clear to see what type of ability they are. Again, we'll go back to the 49ers and their defensive line. Offensive line, at least you know all the guys from the year before are coming back, except for Aaron Banks, and you have Ben Bartsch, who actually, played well. Now, again, I'm not saying this is the most dominant offensive line, but it's like, you know what? Middle of the pack, you can live with that. I know a lot of 49 fans like to think it's the worst offensive line. It is not. Like, did you guys see the Houston Texans play in the postseason? Right? But it's a middle of the pack offensive line, and you would like to improve on some of the guys there. But I think it would be a little bit more difficult as opposed to looking at this defensive line and saying, all right, well, you got Nick Bosa, and then outside of that is Jordan Elliott at defensive tackle, Kevin Givens at defensive tackle, your two gross models. Like, that's your starting defensive line. That's it. So to me, that's a little worrisome. So, loading up on defensive tackle, even if some guys are a little bit more specific with their usage, but they do it at one of the better levels in this draft, I wouldn't be opposed to that at all.
Yeah, because if you look at the defensive tackle list, there's really one guy that would probably be a first rounder of the 30 visits. That's Walter Nolan. And he makes so much sense to bring in because there's some questions about character. They probably want to talk to him and do some background on him. I think it's similar. There's been some whispers about James Pierce. You look at, I've already talked about Josh Simmons. There's the medical red flag there. So clearly you want to talk to him. The unconfirmed visit with Mike Green. He's somebody you're probably going to want to meet with if you're even thinking at all about drafting him, let alone in round 1, even in round 2 as well. And maybe he didn't end up coming in. Maybe the 49ers were like, you know what? We did our background. We're not going to draft him. So let's not even bring him in, Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they're like, man, maybe we are going to bring him in and we don't want to, or maybe just the timing didn't work out or whatever. Maybe they were never going to bring it in. The report's wrong. But if you look at it, it's a bunch of first round edges and it's a bunch of second, third round defensive tackles. TJ Sanders, Tyleik Williams, Darius Alexander, Omar Norman Lott, Aeneas Peebles. And so that tells me that they're going to do a lot of work in a lot of rounds, probably a defensive tackle, maybe end up getting, multiple tackles from that list. But edge and especially the true defensive end that can play every down does dry up in this class, Croc, versus a lot of other maybe rotational rushers that they could potentially get also later. And they might draft 4 defensive linemen. They might take 2 ends and 2 tackles in this draft because it is a deep group and you can find some rotational guys later. You're not going to find an every down defensive end for sure after 43, probably in this draft that you feel really good about, and probably not even after their pick in the first round to find someone who could really project to be someone who could get after the quarterback a little bit and be someone who meets the height and weight and size and run defender prototype as well, because there's a lot of stand-up guys, but not that many that can really get after the quarterback. So that's where my mind is right now. I'm going to get even more specific on a few prospects in this class. Ariante Ursary, offensive tackle, probably second round guy. Anthony Belton, maybe more of a third round offensive tackle. Kane Medrano, UCLA linebacker as well. And maybe a couple more if we have time. Next. Today's episode brought to you by Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada and the Armada Player of the Week. And each week we're talking about a new draft prospect. We pick one guy that stands apart, the guy we believe showcased the strength and power needed to push the 49ers forward as we look ahead to next season. So this week's Armada clear-cut Player of the Week is Ariante Ursary, offensive tackle out of Minnesota. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a second, but you want to talk about heavy duty, rugged, conquers the road with capability and confidence. You dream big, go big. That is Ariante Ursary. That is also the 2025 Nissan Armada, because when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. So take the Nissan Armada, Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. So about that draft plan, Croc, if they go defensive line in round 1, which I really, really do think is the plan, and I think that the 49ers hope that that player is going to be there for them at that position, whether it's an end or a tackle, that they can start the draft with the defensive lineman. And look, if you just look at the roster, you are a non-functional football team right now on the defensive line. If you're the 49ers, you're going to go try to win a bunch of games, right? You can start corners, you can start tight ends and wide receivers, and you can even scrap together a fine offensive line. They were middle of the road last year, would probably be very similar with the line they would be coming in with even before the draft. You cannot say that about their defensive line right now. It's clearly the biggest need for the 49ers. Now, can you get more players later and maybe you go a different position early? Sure. But let's say defensive line early. Round 2 gets interesting because of the prospects they brought in on the offensive line. Kelvin Banks, probably a first-round guy, and it shouldn't be shocking anybody. He's someone that probably is in contention for round 1, but he could be someone that sneaks into the round 2 area and is either at 43 or closer where you could move up. Josh Connolly Jr., very similar. A player that could probably go late 1, early 2, potentially. Shouldn't shock you how high an athletic offensive tackle goes. but it shouldn't shock you if he's still there at pick 43 for the San Francisco 49ers. But the other name that we haven't talked about a lot is Ariante Ursary. And I think he's probably a little bit more likely to be ready, although there is some whispers that teams really love Ursary, and he might go in the first round as well. But the thing about Ursary is he is huge and bigger than all these other guys. And I know the 49ers shocked us a little bit, Croc, when they went with Aaron Banks, because is he really fit that outside zone? He's really big and doesn't really move that well, but the 49ers kind of wanted to go a little bit more in that direction. So with Ariante Ursary in the second round potentially, and then Anthony Belton probably more like pick 75, those would be players that would be very interesting for the San Francisco 49ers based on this list of visits and based on how the draft might go if they don't go offensive tackle in round one. Ariante Ursary specifically is intriguing just because of his traits, Croc. He's 6'6", 331 pounds, but ran a 5.01 40-yard dash, had a 1.74 10-yard split, 33.5-inch arm length. He's a very athletic offensive tackle for how big he is. I think he probably doesn't quite play as athletic as some of his testing looked, and there were some rumors that his testing was going to be off the charts. But we're talking about a second round offensive tackle to be that big and that athletic, and a player to work with at pick 43 to still be available. I would absolutely see it if the 49ers went in that direction and drafted Ursary near the top of the second round there. He's a player that can knock you back just because of his size, and really shows a lot of athleticism in his pass sets, his ability to get off the ball and meet pass rushers. He can get beat at times and can kind of give up his shoulder and give up his chest a little bit. I think he probably trusts his just pure athletic ability and size, maybe a little bit too much sometimes. But man, he's such a big guy and really has imposing size and strength on the offensive line. So he's a really interesting prospect. And I think if you just times two, Anthony Belton in round 3, less athletic, maybe even bigger, maybe even better run blocker, but not quite the athletic player. Anthony Belton would not really, he was kind of a player I didn't really look at a lot, Croc, in this process. Anthony Belton out of NC State, because kind of like the Banks thing, the Aaron Banks thing. It's like, is he really a fit? I don't know if the 49ers would be really into Anthony Belton, because I don't know if he's quite the athlete to get out on the move and do some of the outside zone stuff. But again, another guy, 6'6", 336 pounds, not as athletic with his testing, and you see him not as athletic on tape as well. 5.26 in the 40, 1.82 10-yard split, but man, he's huge, big hands, 34 and 5/8 inch arm length, and he will crush people in the run game. And you know how Kyle Shanahan likes his offensive lineman, Croc. He prefers the run blockers over the pass blockers at times. So, Anthony Belton round 3, I could absolutely see that.
One thing with Anthony Belton, right? Even if you kind of watch him right now and you say, you know what, not quite what we're looking for, but like Aaron Banks, I don't think we were wrong with the evaluation of Aaron Banks coming out of college. Like, we were right. And I think we were right to say what we're seeing right here doesn't quite fit. But as any coach or evaluator, you also have to look and see, hey, does this guy have certain traits that down the line, maybe he can get to the point where he can play for us? And Aaron Banks, who essentially redshirted, a lot of people try to say, no, they redshirted him because they had Laken Tomlinson. Like, dude, you think they wanted to roll Daniel Brunskill out and not have anybody compete with him at the right guard spot? Like, no, Aaron Banks just wasn't ready. And the only second round pick to play less snaps than Aaron Banks that season was Kyle Trask, who was the third string quarterback for Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So every other second string player played except for Aaron Banks. And I don't think it was just a red shirt year for him. It was, he's not quite ready. So yeah, we're going to red shirt him and get him better prepared. Could the 49ers do something like that with Belton? Hey, he has the athleticism we're looking for. He has some of the traits. Maybe he doesn't move as great right now. But man, if we can get him locked into what we're doing, teach him how to get to certain spots, he's definitely a guy that can play for us in the future, and he has the potential to do that. So that's how I would kind of look at maybe a pick like that.
Yeah, and the 49ers do have the opportunity to have some flexibility up front with their offensive line. If they draft a guy, like Belton, maybe he's just a backup in year one, like like Banks was, and maybe he's just a swing tackle or something like that, or maybe he could come in and play right tackle instead of left tackle, right? And you move McKivitz over. Maybe he can come in and compete at left guard. So there's multiple ways to get a prospect's feet wet in this draft class for the 49ers as they're built. But clearly the future.
Hold on, McKivitz. I saw somebody earlier talk about McKivitz maybe in the chat. I saw somebody talk about McKivitz potentially moving to guard and then letting someone else come outside. McKivitz wasn't a good guard. Like, surprisingly, they drafted him to play guard, and he's been a better tackle than he has guard.
I don't. And so now you're changing two positions. I'm with you. Like, I feel like the player they bring in, you put him at left guard, if anything, and then let him become a tackle. But it makes me think, like, so why would they bring in Kelvin Banks? Right? That one feels like a smokescreen in that. Would they draft him at 11? And why did they bring him in? He seems like the evaluation is pretty clear on tape. But did they want to see, like, hey, I want to see you do your pass sets on the right side because we might want you to play right tackle? Would that be a reason to bring him in? Like, what would be the reason? I'm just trying to get in their heads and, like, what are the reasons different prospects are specifically brought in? Maybe that's one of them.
I may have an answer for you.
Because a lot of people like Banks at guard anyway, so he would be an obvious fit. Just put him at guard and have him go out the left tackle. That's the plan I like better if you draft a guy that could be a future tackle. But maybe they think that, and there were some reports I saw that maybe Membo, if they draft him, he's like, he's just more comfortable at right tackle. And if that's the case, then just put him at right tackle.
I may have the answer for you.
Okay.
All right. In my one and only mock draft, look, I'm giving up way too many secrets. I kind of wanted to be more of like, look what I did. All right. But
by the way,
because we're on the top,
in Crocky's one and only mock draft last year, who did you have? A name that didn't show up in a lot of mock drafts, Ricky Pearsall, but you had him in round 2 instead of round 1.
Right. So they drafted him around early. But pick 11, and the cool thing about the mock draft simulator that I use, you can see what trades a team is offering, what picks, and then you can go and kind of see, well, who do I like, who's still available, and will this guy or some of these guys that I like potentially be available at a later time in that round. So I actually moved from pick 11 to pick 20 and still got somebody that I really wanted at 20 that I felt like come in and be a starter for the 49ers. And I was able to recoup and pick 51. So I moved back 9 spots. They drafted Ted McMillan, T-Mac McMillan out of University of Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to draft someone who I felt like would come in and be a day one starter for the 49ers while also picking up a second round pick. Now, I did also give up pick 252, whatever. All right. But getting 51. So then now I had a little bit more ammo in the middle of the second round.
Now you could potentially, if that's the scenario, and look, that would be an awesome scenario for the 49ers to be able to move down. Could you attack all 3 of those things we talked about, right? Because like you were looking at maybe some late round 1, early round 2 offensive tackles, but you really need a defensive tackle. And you see some defensive linemen that are in that area too. Could you go D-line, and still get a future offensive tackle all inside around the top 50 picks and add an extra second round pick, which would be massive for the 49ers? Then you'd be playing around, or you have just extra ammo to move up. That's the other thing is like, we're looking at these guys that they're looking at these prospects that could be there in late round 1. What if the 49ers take one player at 11 and say, no, man, this guy's fallen. We're going up from 43. We're going to go up to pick 29, and we're going to draft another one of these guys that has actually a first round grade too. So and look, the Niners, they're going to make trades, and they are a very aggressive organization. So whether I don't want to say too much about mine. I think I'm going to have the 49ers moving up potentially in a mock draft here before the end, going up from 43 or going up from 75 to secure one of those positions, right? Because I can't see the 49ers sitting there. If their draft plan is what I think it is, to just sit there at 43 and especially sit there at 75 after say they've gone D-line. They sit there and be like, oh man, I hope this one offensive lineman falls to us at 75. They got 9 more picks left in the draft after that? They're going to go get their guy, right? So don't be surprised if the Niners go up at some point as well from 43 or 75 or who knows, anywhere in the NFL draft. One more quick note. And again, another multiple kind of reasons why certain prospects could be looked at, Croc, and brought in. Kane Medrano is really interesting. And I know Ding Brugler likes him a lot. Actually gave him a 4th round grade. I think he's the highest on him. He ran really well. He ran actually in the 4.4s at, I think, 220 something pounds. By the way, both linebackers the 49ers brought in are in the 225 pound range in Kane Medrano and Chris Paul. And maybe that's a reason to bring a guy in. Okay, you weighed this over there. why don't you just stand on the scale for me? Did you drop 10 more pounds since your pro day? As you're trying to bulk up at the combine or whatever? Or have you been gaining weight because that's what everyone's been asking you to do? Can you be, can we believe that you're going to be a 230-pound player at some point, or at least stay above 225 for your entire career? And the other thing that they could possibly do is, we talked about the other UCLA linebacker in Carson Schlesinger that we like a lot, Croc. It probably has to be a second-round pick at pick 43. What if they bring in Kane Medrano, not because they're interested in Kane Medrano, but they want to ask him about Carson Schlesinger, right? So there's just a lot of different reasons and different ways that this can go. And why do you bring in prospects? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? What's the smoke screen? What's not the smoke screen? But in the end, I think the thing that they are telling us, and it's hard to hide because you're not going to bring in 27 smoke screen prospects for 30 visits, right, Croc? So what are they telling us? They're going to go D-line early. That's something we should already know. And it might go edge, D-tackle, or then offensive tackle, then defensive tackle heavy after that. And man, the more I think about it, the more I think they're probably trading up from 75 to get the third of those position groups and make sure they get the guys they want. That's what I think. And then all those other positions, obviously, on day 3. What do you think they're going to do? Let us know at BD Peacock, at Crocky209. Drop a comment on YouTube. We're going to have mock drafts to come. We're in draft week, all the late draft information and post-draft. Stick with us as well to break down everybody the San Francisco 49ers bring in to the organization. And Croc and I back tomorrow right here, Locked On 49ers. Go Warriors.